Hi everyone, my name's Jordan and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be giving some fantasy recommendations. These are going to be books that I think are good introductions into the fantasy genre. I know I have a few friends that read a lot that are intimidated by fantasy, and I get it. A lot of times they can be very complex and there's a lot going on, and if you have not read fantasy previously, sometimes they can be a little overwhelming. So I have gone through and collected some books that I think do not have overly complicated magic systems and that are fun in their own way outside of the fantasy elements. So these are all very different fantasy books, so that maybe if you have not read fantasy before and want to get into it, maybe one of these will stick out to you as something similar to what you already read, just with magic. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first book I have on my list is City of Brass by Shannon Chakraborty. This is a book I've talked about previously. It is in my video of favorite fantasy books of all time, which I will link above. This series has kind of a complex world, a little bit. Now you're probably thinking, Jordan, you just said these wouldn't be complex. Yes. However, I don't think the magic is complex in this. I think that the world provides a little bit of complexity, but not any more so than you would find in a non-fantasy book. This story follows Nahri, who is a woman living in Cairo in the 18th century who kind of cons people out of their money. She convinces them that she can do palm readings and small healings and things like that, and people pay her for it. One day she accidentally summons a djinn who convinces her to go with him to Davabad, which is the magical city of brass. And what follows is Nahri experiencing a world that she thought was all a myth and experiencing this whole new place. She learns that some of her magic was real. Some of the things she was doing for these people was actual magic. The reason I recommend this as an introductory fantasy is it has a lot of elements of like a found family, but also there's a lot of romantic elements. There's like a love triangle, which is not a very annoying love triangle like some of them can be. But I really just feel like this story has a lot of ties to non-fantasy books and themes and things like that with fantasy thrown in. Out of all of the books on this list, this one is probably the most fantastical and the most magical. So this one is definitely, you're kind of jumping in. However, I don't think it is hard to understand by any means. I think that this story is incredible, and I think non-fantasy readers would also love this story. It reads almost like a historical fiction with like some magic thrown in. It is very good. The next book I'm going to recommend is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. I talk about this book in a lot of videos. I really love this series. The reason I'm recommending it as an introductory fantasy book is that there's really not a whole lot of fantasy elements. It is technically a fantasy book, and there are technically magic users in this story. However, they are not the main characters, and they are not even like main plot points in this first book. So this book follows a set of orphans who are trained from a young age to become master con artists and thieves. And what we follow is them as they grow and mature and pull off these incredible heists. It almost gives Ocean's 11 vibes, like with the very complex heists and a group of characters that are all adept in their own ways. The magic involved comes in later in the book and later in the series, so there definitely are some fantasy elements. However, they are not the main focus of the story. It's at its core a heist novel and a heist series. However, there are some incredible friendships and relationships. There's my favorite trope of a found family, and the heists and the plot is always just so well thought out that I'm just sitting there like mouth agape the whole time I read it. Like some of the stuff they're able to pull off is so impressive. The characters are all so intelligent and so good at their craft. And so yeah, this is a great book. And if you want to read something that is very fun and set in what feels like a very magical world, but there's not a whole lot of like magic to learn, this is a good start for you. The next book on my recommendations list is Jade City by Fonda Lee. This is the first book in the Greenbone saga. This one is definitely a very dark book. The series is a lot darker than some of these other ones. I would recommend this book to fans of movies like The Godfather. It definitely has like that mob family theme running through it. This is an Asian-inspired fantasy book series about a family called the Cal family, who are one of the leading mob families in this country of Kaigen. They use jade, like the stone jade, to enhance their magical abilities. The jade gives them strength, perception, speed, things like that. And the more jade you have, the more power you get. And so we follow the politics of this country as these two competing mob families try to vie for power. And it is really, really, really good series. The last book is probably the best ending to a series I've ever read. This series is also my best fantasy series of all time. The magic system is, I don't believe, very complex. You do have to kind of learn what the jade does, but the jade is the only magic. So once you understand how the jade works, that's really all you need to know in terms of the magic system. Now the politics are a little more complex, and learning how the politics of these clans work and the politics of this country works is a little harder. However, I don't think that is a necessarily fantasy thing. In many books, you have to learn about the politics of a family and the politics of a country, and that doesn't necessarily mean it has to do with fantasy. So the fantasy elements of this book are relatively easier to understand. I think this fantasy series should be read by anyone that can read it. It is really such a beautiful, beautiful story. The first two I thought were a little overhyped but still really enjoyable, but then after I read the third one, it like jumped to one of my favorite series of all times. The third book is a masterpiece. And that is not to say the first two are bad. They were also very good. I just thought that people were talking about them a lot more than I enjoyed them. However, I still did enjoy them. The series is violent and full of family and love and hate, and it really explores some very incredible themes and also some really dark themes. However, I still recommend this to anyone. Definitely check the content warnings if you are worried about it. There are a lot of darker themes in this book. The next book on my recommendations list is Caraval by Stephanie Garber. I really hope I'm saying that right. I've been saying it this way since I got these books, and I don't know if I've ever heard anyone else talk about the first one, and if they have, I haven't really paid attention. So I really love this series. This is a series that is very magical, but in a more of like a fairy tale sense almost. It follows a woman and her sister who go into this Caraval, which is a magical, basically like a carnival or like a circus kind of thing, and what you see is not necessarily what is there. At this Caraval, everyone has a task. Basically, it's a huge game, and the game this year is to find one of these sisters. She is taken as soon as they get there, and she is the prize of this carnival. And so the other sister is bent on finding her. That is her main goal. However, this carnival is not what it seems. Everywhere you turn is something else that you do not understand, and it is such a lovely, fantastical story. Stephanie Garber is a master at the fairy tale kind of storytelling. You never really know what's going on, but neither do the characters, and everywhere you turn is things changing shape and doing weird stuff that is not normal. I just think that her storytelling is so beautiful. The prose is very lovely. The aesthetic and the atmosphere of these books is so gripping. Like, you feel really enmeshed in this story. And there are a lot of themes that you would normally pick up in fairy tales, but she twists them and turns them and makes them a little darker. And it is just, these books are so good. And now she's working on a spin-off series, and that one is also very good. Only the first book is out so far, but I really loved it. And I just love Stephanie Garber as an author. These are YA books, so they read a little younger. The reason I recommend this for people that don't necessarily read fantasy is that while it is fantastical and confusing, the characters are also confused. So like, you are learning what's going on with them, and you never really have the full picture. And I think that is what is so fun about these books. You never really know what's going on. And so I think anyone can pick this up and be just as confused as a hardcore fantasy reader, but in a good way. That is the point of the book. So I may have not described that well. I may have put people off of it by saying how confusing it is, but like, that is the point. I don't know. They're very good if you want like a fairy tale type fantasy book. The next book on my list is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. This is a Asian-inspired fantasy story that is self-published, so very cool. It is a hugely hyped book on the book community. Everyone hypes this book up as one of the best self-published books to come out recently. I really, really loved this book. We follow this small country that is kind of isolated from the rest of the world, and they have these magical powers that involve water and ice. The magic system is not incredibly complex, and what we follow is this very war-centric society. They are taught from a young age how to fight and how to harness their powers, and we follow a mother and her son that are a part of this ultra-powerful family called the Matsudas. And what we follow is them trying to live in this very hard society and very aggressive society as they face war at their borders. I really love the themes that this book explores. It explores themes of like misinformation from the government, and it explores themes of family and family dynamics and loyalty, as well as loyalty to yourself. And I really love the explorations of motherhood that we get, as well as the explorations of marriage and how to make a marriage successful. There's just really a whole lot of deep, dark themes in this book, and I think that the author explored them wonderfully, masterfully. The reason I recommend this as a starter fantasy is that the magic system is not very complex. The magic is a huge part of the book. It is what creates like the power structure in this society. However, the magic itself is not very hard to understand. It's not super complex, but the family dynamics and things are. And it is also, another perk for it as an introductory fantasy book, is it is also a standalone. So you don't have to commit to a whole series to finish the story. This is a standalone book. This is only one of 2 standalones on this list, so if you really just want one book to get into fantasy with, this one I think is a good starting spot. The next book on my list is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This is a urban fantasy, which for non-fantasy readers, that just means that it is set in our world, but there is magic involved. So it is about this young woman who goes to college in North Carolina, I believe, and discovers that she has magical powers as she is looking for the reason behind her mother's death. This book explores a lot of themes of racism in America and battling America's past and things like that. But it also has like a secret society college vibe, and it has really cool magical elements. The reason I recommend this one as an introductory fantasy is that it is an urban fantasy. So you are not having to learn a whole new world. There's not anything different about the world itself besides the secret society of magic users. So you're in America, you're in a real college that exists, you're just adding magic to it. So learning the world is not hard, you just have to learn about the magic. So I think that this is a great start. It is a YA book, so it reads a little younger. The sequel comes out this year, so better get on this one soon. But I think this is a great place to start if you want to get into fantasy. I would definitely check the content warnings for this one. It deals with a lot of darker themes. There is death, there is grief, there is racism, etc. So check those before going into this one. The second to last book on my recommendations list is Strange to the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This book is beautiful. This book follows Laszlo, who is a junior librarian who is quiet and kind of treated unfairly, who has always been obsessed with the lost city of Weep. And a legendary band of warriors show up who are looking to find Weep. They realize that Laszlo has a vast knowledge of this lost city and recruit him to come along with them. The magic and the world in this one are definitely very different from any book I've ever read. and it is a little more complex. However, the reason I recommend this as an introductory fantasy is the prose. This book has very flowery writing. It has very beautiful writing. Everything is detailed and described very succinctly, and I just think that that is something that a lot of people look for in non-fantasy books as well. A lot of people go into like contemporary fiction and stuff looking for this beautiful descriptive storytelling, and this definitely provides. I did not love the sequel as much. While it was still very good, I didn't love it as much. However, because of Laini Taylor's prose, you're never very confused, or at least I didn't feel very confused while reading this book. While everything was a little weird and very different, it all was digestible, and it was very fun to read. My brain was loving the prose. I don't know if I'm alone in this, but a lot of times when I'm reading a book that has very unique prose, I find myself enjoying the process of reading it, separate from the story. Like, the story can be boring as all get out, but if the prose is keeping me interested, like, I enjoy reading it. Now, this book is not boring, so you get the awesome story as well as this beautiful prose that is enjoyable to read and fun to read. A lot of times when a book has really good prose, I'll read it out loud to myself because, like, forming the words with my mouth is enjoyable. So that might be weird, that I might be alone in that, but this book is one of those books where the prose is a star unto itself. So definitely recommend this. The last book on my recommendations list is The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. This is kind of like a historical fiction meets fantasy. So, in real life, we all know Mozart, right? The composer. He had a sister, and she was also incredibly talented. And as children, they would travel Europe and perform for people. However, as they got older, his sister was, being a woman, instructed to give up her music in order to get married, start a family, things like that. And Mozart became the star. And as children, they had this magical world they always would go to, like they would always talk about and play pretend in, and it was called the Kingdom of Back. So basically, Marie Lu has taken this history and taken this story and made the Kingdom of Back real. Marie Lu takes the story of Mozart and his sister and retells their story. She tells the story of them writing music together and the pressures they are both individually under, as well as creating the Kingdom of Back to be real. And so the two of them go to the Kingdom of Back and they meet people there, and this place is real. However, they're still making their music and telling their story. And I think it is a beautifully written book. It is very unique. It is definitely not like, I would not take this book as like a biography by any means. It is definitely a retelling. However, I think the three themes that Marie Lu is able to tackle in terms of sexism and things like that is just so masterfully done. She really shows how young women just want to be happy and be successful in the same way that young men are, but historically have not always had that opportunity. And it shows that Mozart and his sister were both incredibly talented. They both had such beautiful music inside of them, and when they worked together, they created this beautiful symphony of music. However, they were not both allowed the same opportunity to pursue that in adulthood, and I think this book is lovely. The magic is not hard to understand here. It is a children's magical world in their imagination of a place they go to, only it's made real. We all played imaginary games as kids. We all came up with our own worlds. That's this, but made real. And it is this beautiful world where magic exists, and it is, the whole story is just so wonderful. And it's so unique, and you do learn too. Like, a lot of this stuff did really happen, and it caused me to go do a little bit of research on them, and I really enjoyed this book, and I highly recommend it. And I think it is a good place to start in fantasy because the fantasy elements are not the main purpose of the story. It just enhances the story. So that is all of the books I would recommend for somebody that has not read fantasy before. If you are looking to get into fantasy and want to see if it is a genre for you, check out one of these books on this list and let me know if you do. I'd love to hear if it made you like fantasy, or you thought it was too confusing, or it made you not like fantasy. If you are a fantasy fan, let me know some other good introductory fantasy books for people down below, so that anyone can look around and just find books. I always am trying to get people to read fantasy. I think that it is a wonderful genre that is looked down upon sometimes in a way that I think is frustrating, because there are a lot of opportunities to learn from fantasy. Ultimately, it's a great genre, so everyone should try it out. And again, it may not be everyone's cup of tea. You may not enjoy fantasy, but might as well try it out. There's nothing that it could hurt. I would like to thank you all for your support. It means the world to me. And thank you for watching this video. And until next time, thank you.